Rose Hill Oaks was the kind of neighborhood where everything looked perfect on the surface: trimmed hedges, pastel-painted mailboxes, and every front yard approved by the homeowners association. But perfection was a mask, and beneath it, something ugly waited. It was a Sunday afternoon when the mask slipped. The sun hung lazily above, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. Sophia Martinez, 13 years old and wrapped in a cozy lavender sweater, sat quietly in her wheelchair on her own front lawn. Watercolor paints balanced on her tray table as she sketched little wildflowers from memory. Her dad, Miguel, watered the roses nearby, occasionally glancing at her with a proud smile. The neighborhood was calm until it wasn't. A shrill voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "You think you're special because of that chair? You think the rules don't apply to you?" Karen Duncan, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, stormed across the street, fury in her eyes. Her clipboard slapped against her thigh with every stomping step. Miguel turned sharply, instinctively stepping between Karen and his daughter, but the woman was relentless. "I'm sick of the special treatment, sick of the sympathy act," Karen snapped, pointing her finger in Sophia's face. "Don't give me those puppy eyes. You and your ramp and your noise. This is a respectable neighborhood." Sophia's hands trembled around her brush. She tried to speak, but her voice caught. Miguel raised his hand, palm out, his voice low and even. "Karen, that's enough." But Karen wasn't finished. She leaned in closer, loud enough for neighbors to peek through blinds. "Cry if you want," she hissed. "You people come here and act like we owe you everything just because you're—" The sound of a car engine cut her off. A black sedan slid into the driveway. The door opened, and Naomi stepped out, heels clicking sharply on the concrete. She wore a dark suit, hair pinned up, face calm, too calm. She looked once at Sophia, then at Karen. "I suggest you step back," she said coolly. Karen blinked. "And who exactly are you?" Naomi didn't flinch. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded envelope. "I'm Sophia's mother, and your worst legal nightmare." The color drained from Karen's face. Because this wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Martinez family had dreamed of peace when they moved into Rose Hill Oaks. It was a quiet, picture-perfect neighborhood tucked behind iron gates and lined with identical trees and identical mailboxes. Miguel and Naomi thought it would be the ideal place to raise their daughter, Sophia, who had been in a wheelchair since the age of 5. After years of hospitals, therapy, and the chaos of city living, Rose Hill Oaks seemed like a sanctuary. The house they bought sat on a corner lot with just enough yard for Sophia to plant her favorite lavender. Miguel, who worked remotely as a software engineer, spent most of his time at home, managing Sophia's needs during the day. Naomi, a high-profile trial lawyer, worked downtown. She was rarely seen in the neighborhood, but when she moved with a purpose that made people step aside. Miguel built a wheelchair ramp the very first week they moved in, painting it the same color as the porch and lining it with potted succulents. Sophia adored it. It made her feel independent, able to roll out and enjoy the breeze while painting or reading. The ramp became her favorite place. But not everyone appreciated the new addition. Karen Duncan, the HOA president, came knocking 3 days after it went up. She stood stiffly at the door in a pressed khaki skirt and collared shirt, holding a clipboard that practically vibrated with judgment. Miguel greeted her with a polite smile, wiping paint off his hands from finishing the ramp's trim. "That structure out front," Karen began, not bothering with a hello, "was not pre-approved by the HOA committee. Page 42, Section C, of the bylaws clearly states, it's a wheelchair ramp," Miguel interrupted gently. "For my daughter." Karen's expression didn't soften. "Regardless of your circumstances, modifications to the exterior must be submitted and approved before installation. I'm afraid this is a violation." Miguel stared at her, waiting to see if this was a joke. It wasn't. "I'll file a retroactive approval," he offered. "I'm sure once they understand." Karen had already turned and walked away, muttering something about lowering standards. That was their welcome. Despite the rocky start, Miguel tried to keep things positive for Sophia. She was thriving in their new home. Every morning, she rolled down the ramp with a notebook in her lap and a pencil between her fingers, ready to capture the world. Neighbors waved occasionally, some smiled, some ignored them completely. But it didn't matter. Miguel told himself that people needed time. They'd adjust. The important thing was that Sophia was happy. And for a while she truly was. Until the notices began. The first violation notice came folded in a bright yellow envelope, stuck halfway into the mailbox like a threat. It stated that non-compliant external modifications must be corrected within 14 days. No mention of the fact that it was a wheelchair ramp. No acknowledgement of Sophia's needs. Just a cold demand to restore the original architecture. Miguel filed the appeal paperwork immediately, attaching documentation from Sophia's physician and photos of the ramp. He even highlighted a section in the state housing code that allowed for accessibility modifications. He dropped it off at the HOA office the next morning, hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, a second notice arrived. This time, it cited excessive visual clutter in the front yard. The clutter? Sophia's flower pots. 5 of them, all neatly arranged. Miguel removed them without a word. Soon after, Karen sent a complaint about the marks left by Sophia's wheelchair on the sidewalk. Scuff marks. Rubber streaks from the turns she made while painting. The letter called it graffiti and vandalism. Miguel was stunned. At first, he tried to reason with Karen. He approached her at the community mailbox, politely asked what the issue was. She didn't even look at him. "Rules are rules," she said flatly and walked off. Then came the incident with Sophia's medical lift. It was a small mechanical unit installed beside the back porch. Miguel had carefully placed it out of sight from the street. It helped Sophia move from her chair to the swing they'd hung for her. She loved it. It made her feel like everyone else. But Karen called it an eyesore and filed a formal complaint. This time, Naomi got involved. She drafted a response letter using legal jargon that Miguel couldn't even pronounce. But when he handed it over to the HOA, the manager barely glanced at it. "We just enforce what the board decides," he said with a shrug. Karen's power was absolute. Soon, other neighbors began keeping their distance. Miguel noticed the subtle glances, the whispered conversations when he passed by with Sophia. He tried not to let it show, but it was getting to him. Sophia asked one day why no one came to play anymore. He had no answer. Things escalated further when Karen took photos of Sophia's ramp, after she had painted a small flower mural on the side. It had taken her a week to finish it, soft pinks and yellows blooming across the wood. It was beautiful. Karen called it graffiti. The violation fine came 2 days later. That was when Miguel lost his patience. He stormed into the HOA office and demanded to see Karen. She wasn't there, of course. He left a message. No one returned his call. From then on, the notices arrived like clockwork. Every 2 weeks, always signed by Karen. The accusations grew more ridiculous. Unauthorized outdoor art, improper placement of mobility equipment, potential health hazard, excessive presence of non-native plants. It was harassment, plain and simple. Naomi noticed the tension in Miguel's voice during dinner. He told her it was nothing. "Karen's just annoying," he said, but he didn't tell her how Sophia had stopped painting, how she stared at the ramp like it had betrayed her, how he'd caught her crying in her room after school, quietly ripping up her sketchbook pages. He didn't tell her everything. Not yet. Sophia had always been resilient. Hospitals, surgeries, long days of therapy. She had taken it all with a quiet kind of courage that inspired everyone who knew her. But lately, something in her spirit had started to dim. It began with silence. She stopped humming when she painted. She stopped asking Miguel to push her outside. When her old school friends called, she let the phone ring. Miguel noticed, but each time he asked what was wrong, she smiled and said, "I'm just tired." But it wasn't just fatigue. One afternoon, Miguel stood by her bedroom door and overheard her talking to her friend Layla on a video call. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "I think they hate me here. The neighbors. I feel like I don't belong. Like I'm not normal. Miguel leaned against the wall, his heart breaking. This was supposed to be their fresh start. A safe space for Sophia to grow. Instead, she was shrinking. That night, Naomi came home earlier than usual. She sat beside Miguel on the couch, noticing his furrowed brow and distant stare. "Talk to me," she said gently. He hesitated. Then slowly the truth spilled out. The notices, the fines, the glares, the isolation, Karen, all of it. Naomi's face didn't change as she listened. She didn't gasp or yell. She simply nodded, one slow movement at a time, until he finished. "She's been targeting Sophia," he said finally, "and I thought I could handle it." Naomi stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. Her arms were crossed tightly across her chest. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked without turning around. "I didn't want to distract you. You've got court cases, deadlines." Naomi turned back sharply. "Sophia is not a distraction." Miguel nodded, ashamed. Naomi exhaled deeply. "Okay, we'll document everything. Every letter, every photo, every word. If Karen wants a war, she just found her opponent." But even with Naomi's resolve, the damage had already been done to Sophia. At dinner the next evening, Sophia barely picked at her food. When Naomi asked how her day went, she shrugged. "It was okay," she mumbled. "Karen called me a faker." Miguel froze. Naomi put her fork down slowly. "She said that to your face?" Sophia nodded. "She told Miss Lacey across the street that I'm pretending to be worse than I am. That I use the wheelchair to make people feel sorry for me." Miguel looked away, jaw clenched. Naomi's voice was like ice. "Noted." It was the neighborhood's annual cookout, one of those forced smile events where residents pretended to like each other over grilled burgers and folding chairs. Miguel didn't want to go. Sophia didn't either. But Naomi insisted. "You need to show them we're not hiding," she said firmly. "We belong here." So they went. Miguel pushed Sophia down the sidewalk toward the park. Naomi walked beside them, holding her hand. At first, everything was fine. Sophia smiled as a few kids came over to say hello. Someone had brought a karaoke machine, and music drifted over the picnic tables. The scent of grilled corn and charcoal filled the air. Then Karen showed up. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and her usual expression of superiority. She mingled with a few board members, sipping lemonade and casting glances in Sophia's direction. Miguel saw her coming before she reached them. He tensed, but Naomi placed a calming hand on his arm. Karen walked right up to Sophia and stared down at her plate. "Getting second helpings, huh?" she said loudly. "You already had your turn." Sophia blinked, confused. "I didn't. This is my first." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "You cut the line. I saw you. Using that chair to jump ahead like you always do." The chatter around them stopped. Miguel stepped forward. "That's enough." Karen ignored him. "You think because you roll around in that thing you get special treatment? Poor little girl in the chair, right?" Sophia's face crumpled. Her hands trembled. Naomi stepped in, her voice calm. "Karen, back away." Karen scoffed. "Or what? You'll file another complaint." Naomi didn't answer. A teenager nearby lifted their phone and hit record. Karen noticed. "Go ahead and film. Let everyone see what happens when someone tells the truth around here." And then, the moment everything changed. A sleek black car pulled up at the curb. Miguel turned, confused. Naomi had already been here. But it wasn't Naomi's car. Out stepped Naomi's law partner. Tall, sharp-suited, sunglasses on. He walked straight to Naomi, handed her a sealed envelope, and nodded. Naomi turned back to Karen and held up the letter. "This is a formal cease and desist for harassment, discrimination, and defamation of a minor," she said quietly. Karen's mouth opened. No sound came out. Naomi leaned in slightly. "You're done." Karen didn't say a word as Naomi handed her the envelope. Her eyes darted around, scanning the silent crowd, searching for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. But there was only stillness. Neighbors stared. Phones remained raised. Sophia wiped her eyes quietly with a napkin, her small frame shaking as Miguel knelt beside her. The cookout ended early that day. By evening, the video had already made its rounds on the neighborhood group chat. Comments flooded in words like unacceptable, cruel, and disgusting. A few people admitted they'd always been afraid to stand up to Karen. Now they regretted staying silent for so long. 2 days later, Naomi filed a formal lawsuit against both Karen and the HOA board for allowing ongoing harassment and discrimination against a disabled minor. It wasn't just a letter anymore. It was a case, and Naomi was relentless. She compiled everything. The notices, the photos, the testimonies from neighbors who had been intimidated into silence. Even the therapist's notes about Sophia's anxiety. Miguel scanned documents and highlighted text like his life depended on it. And Sophia slowly began to understand what was happening. Not just that justice was being served, but that she mattered enough for it to be. When the HOA board received the legal notice, they panicked. Emergency meetings were called. Karen's name disappeared from the community newsletter. She resigned within a week. But Naomi didn't stop there. A month later, in court, Naomi stood beside her daughter as her voice echoed through the room. She detailed the months of cruelty, the emotional toll, and the culture of silence that let it happen. The judge listened closely. So did Karen. Quiet for once, no clipboard, no smug remarks, just eyes fixed on the floor. The court ruled in the Martinez family's favor. Karen was ordered to pay damages. The HOA had to revise its bylaws to include stronger protections against discrimination. A public apology was issued. Naomi declined the press interviews. She wasn't interested in attention. She only wanted her daughter to feel safe again. And Sophia? She smiled more now. The flower mural on the ramp was repainted with bright purples and oranges, this time with help from the neighborhood kids. The Martinez front yard became a favorite hangout spot. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Sophia looked up at her mom and whispered, "You didn't just fight for me. You showed me how to fight too." Naomi kissed her forehead. "That's what moms do."